The end of the year is usually a time for reflection for many, a time to look at what went well and what didn't. Well, let's reflect 2024 for the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And I'm joined by Matthew Parks, Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator. A very good afternoon to you, evening rather. Matthew, thanks very much for your time. Habits, die hard. But from your own assessment, 2024 has been a year of mixed fortunes, constituting both highs and lows.
Good evening. Thanks for having us, and I think best wishes to all the listeners, and I think also to those workers who are working on duty today, whether they're police officers or defense force personnel or nurses or cleaners. So I think we want to express our support and our appreciation to them. And I think also to encourage those who are driving to drive safely and so on. No, you're right, for you. It has been a mixed bag of issues. We have seen real progress on many fronts. We have not had load shedding for more than half a year, and that's real progress because that enables the economy to kind of pick up again. We have seen unemployment fall in the last quarter by nearly 1%. That's positive news. We've seen not only Eskom being rebuilt, but also Transnet getting momentum in terms of getting our goods onto rails and through our ports, which is key to the exporting industries. We've seen real progress at reopening metro rail lines, which is key to transporting workers in our cities. And I think the South African Revenue Service, the workers there have done a fantastic job of rebuilding SARS, which was part of the state capture project. And that's enabled additional tax revenue owed to the state to be collected to help fund public services. And we are beginning to see a culture of accountability of many politicians, especially from the ruling party, the ANC, when they're being charged, then they must stand aside. So there are positive things. I think we should not dismiss them or lose sight of them in the normal day-to-day thrust of politics, when we often tend to focus on the negative and forget about the positive achievements, which are real achievements. And of course, we had 7 democratic elections, 30 years of democracy. But whilst appreciating those achievements for you and encouraging more such achievements, including South Africa's leading international role in offering solidarity to the Palestinian people through the International Court of Justice, we also really are struggling on many fronts too. We have a 41% unemployment rate. We've got entrenched levels of poverty, of inequality, of crime and corruption. We've seen many municipalities really struggling. We've seen many public services really battling to deliver quality services to working class communities. And so it's a mixed bag. There's progress where gives us hope that we can do better, but of course there are real problems, and we don't have unlimited political space to deal with them. We have to see government move much faster. We've also got to see the private sector too, avoiding retrenchment and really offering solidarity to workers, and also including paying workers a living wage. So there's a mixed bag of fruit, so to speak.
Let's start with the politics, if you will. How do you feel about the fact that you spend almost half of the year mobilizing support for your senior ally, the ANC, but which on the back of that registered its worst performance to date?
No, obviously we're disappointed. We've been in alliance with the ANC since Cosatu was formed, and even our predecessors. The ANC is a liberation movement and so obviously it's a disappointment. We had campaigned for an outright majority, not just because of sentimentality, but because we had helped draft the ANC manifesto. We were convinced it's the only party which will really champion working class needs. It's the only party which we felt has advocated workers' rights, including on labor laws and so forth. But I think, look, a setback can also be a good thing too. If it forces one to engage in well-needed, long overdue, serious self-introspection, one listen to the outcry of voters, especially workers who are tired of corruption, who are angry about the high levels of unemployment, who are frustrated by dysfunctional municipalities. It is not an unexpected surprise. Everybody could see where it was coming. It's also not surprising when a party has been ruling for 30 years for people to become tired. So it's a useful opportunity for the ANC the whole alliance, including ourselves as Cosatu, to really reflect internally, how can we do better? What have we done wrong? And to correct those mistakes. If we don't correct them, then we'll see much worse results. But I think we have been heartened by the ANC really trying to address issues, from its renewal campaign to removing compromised people in government, to trying to fix the state and grow the economy. Of course, we are frustrated at times when we think they're making mistakes, when they're not moving fast enough. But that is what we must do. We must keep putting pressure. We have seen the ANC doing better in some of the by-elections recently, even regaining quite a few municipalities in the Northern Cape and Limpopo and so forth. But I don't think anyone from the ANC should be celebrating a 40% result. I think that is a wake-up call. And of course, the ANC needs to see how does it handle internal division better, because most of the ANC decline in support is because of splinter groups, whether it's the EFF or MK Party, UDM, all these different various splinter groups over the years, including COPE, etc. So the ANC does need to find a way of reconnecting with the supporters, or more often just don't even bother to vote as well. So it's a painful moment, but I think one is part of the cycle of democracy, and one must learn from it if one wants to correct the mistakes.
But what exactly about what you've seen and heard since the election that gives you that hope that the ANC is indeed on a path to renew itself and is not instead trying to find excuses for its disastrous performance?
Yeah, look, the damage that was dealt to the ANC, to the state, to society under the previous leadership of Jacob Zuma was disastrous. To be honest with you, it was going to take, I think, about a decade to fix that decade of state capture and corruption. And I think one doesn't need to relitigate all the damages, from load shedding to cable theft to Transnet, Metrorail, the implosion across the state and the impact they had upon the economy. But I think we've seen some progress too. I think we obviously had to recover from the results of the COVID-19 global pandemic, which really put a huge shock to the economy and saw unemployment rising to record levels. But I think since that time, we've seen unemployment falling by about 10%, from 46 to 41%. I think we've seen real progress in rebuilding ESCOM. We're beginning to see green shoots around Transnet and Metrorail. We've seen real progress around SARS. And of course, I think the ANC has been bold, not as fast as and as hard as we would have loved it to see it to be. But I think the culture now that if you are charged, you've not even been tried yet, let alone convicted or sentenced, but that you'll step aside. I think that's beginning to build a culture of accountability, and hopefully it sends a signal of intolerance towards corruption. And those are positive things, but I think also one would be foolish to celebrate. When you have a 41% unemployment rate, you have a 70% youth unemployment rate, and we still have normalized a culture of corruption, of poverty, of inequality, etc. So there's good progress, and one is not naive to expect miracles overnight. I think one just wants to see systematic progress. But again, you can't expect society to be patient forever when 4 out of 10 South Africans can't find work. That is a ticking time bomb. I think the ANC is learning the message, but at times we do get frustrated when some politicians in the ANC misbehave. And we've had to speak out vocally to the ANC, internally and publicly, when they make mistakes. And I think that's the way we're going to have to deal with the issues. But as Cosatu, we're not going to retreat because, the state is a strategic center of power. We must contest it, including with those who don't agree with us, and to see how to push government and the ANC to do much better towards workers and their families.
But how worried are you, as Cosatu, that whatever is afflicting or has afflicted the ANC may just have a contagious effect on Cosatu itself? And I'm asking this because Cosatu has always said that you do not sort of artificially distinguish, between the worker who is exploited on the factory floor and who has to trudge home to inhumane living conditions.
No, we're very worried, and it'll be strange if we were not worried. We've been worried politically when it's names make serious mistakes, the decade of state capture and all the disasters that accompany it. We've been worried about the ANC's electoral performance. If we look at the local elections in 2016, when the ANC lost control outright of most of the uni cities across the country, we've been worried about the decline of the ANC in the Western Cape for the past 2 decades. The decline of the ANC in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal more recently. So it is a deep, deep area of concern. But look, I think what also gives us hope is that most of the ANC voters have not really gone to other parties. Yes, some of them have gone to EFF and MK, But what you really find is that most ANC voters have just simply stayed at home. So there's a point of great concern because we think the ANC has got the potential to rebuild itself. We think on many fronts the ANC has done well, not just in the liberation of the country and the progressive constitutional labor laws, but even kind of building the foundations for a better life, like our national health insurance, like the social security relief we put in place for the poor, like the response to COVID-19. So many fronts the ANC has done well, and we're convinced it's the only party which really can advance the transformation project. As much as the ANC's got issues, if you look at other parties, they're far, far worse off. One cannot really put faith or hope or confidence in them. But it's not an easy thing. I think at times again you do see ANC ministers, ANC leaders blundering. But I think overall, on many fronts, they have done well. We have a president of the ANC who comes from the ranks of the trade unions, who's really championed the spirit of social compacts, who worked closely with unions on many fronts. And that is all able to kind of collaborate collectively together as government, as labor, as business, as civil society to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. We did far better there than many more industrialized, wealthier nations did. So it's a mixed bag. But I think for us, we have hope. We've been through darker periods before, the decade of state capture, the dark days of apartheid. But again, one mustn't be complacent. It is natural for any party across any democracy after 3 decades in power to really struggle with internal contradictions, and that's what we are seeing. But we are seeing some positive signs of hope as well at the same time.
Speaking of internal contradictions, it would seem that fear of what may happen to it is what led, or at least in part, your other ally, the SACP, to decide to contest elections.
Yeah, no, look, the SACP decision, one obviously can't speak for the party. It isn't their right to want to contest elections. It's not the first time, in fact. In fact, during the days of apartheid, the SACP actually even contested for the national parliament. You had people like Ray Alexander and a few others, Sam Khan, who actually won seats in the parliament on behalf of African constituencies. So, but look, I mean, that's a bit of a historical footnote. Look, I think what we agree with the parties on is a need for a radical reconfiguration of the lines, to make sure the lines really is at the center of political discourse and policy direction for the ANC, for the state, or make sure the lines is part of key decisions, not one simply just left to read it in the newspapers. But also, I think to make sure that the ANC manifesto itself is the anchor for the policy direction of the state, or to make sure that the state does implement the electoral manifesto of the ANC, because those have been really the key frustration points. I think the party itself has said they want to see these reconfiguration of the lines take place and that it really be addressed. And, there are merits to the arguments. If the party is able to help excite people who have lost confidence in the ANC but who don't want to go to other parties, that can be a positive thing. If the party can help to reinvigorate the alliance, that can be a good thing. And the party has got a long history in the struggle for over 100 years. And often when the ANC has gone through difficult phases during the liberation struggle and beyond, it often has been the party which has helped to ignite it. So I think we're looking forward to see how to adjust it. And I think the party's made it quite clear there's not a question of divorce, there's a question of rearranging internal relations, etc., but to strengthen the lines too. And I think if we can achieve that objective, we'll welcome it. Of course, we have to manage it delicately because we can't afford for the lines to be divided as well, because that would be a disaster for us. But I'm sure that the leadership of the ANC and the SSCP and Cosatu is mature and strategic enough to manage what will be a delicate process at times.
So you would have seen people saying, I mean, that's all semantics, because that argument, especially by members of the SACP. But I want us to move away. I would have wanted to canvass the issue of the reconfiguration as well, because, I mean, it's been on the table for the longest time with very little, if any, movement. But I want us to talk about a bit before we end the interview about Cosatu itself and some of the sort of labor issues. You have described the coming into effect of the two-pot retirement system in September as the sweetest victory. Why is that in your eyes?
Yeah, no, there's a positive victory. The two-pot pension reforms was an initiative that Cosatu first raised during COVID-19, when workers were not getting paid because the employers couldn't work during the lockdown, yet they had significant savings in the pension fund, and many workers were just choosing to resign and cash out. And even beyond and before COVID-19, the pension funds didn't allow workers to access the pension funds unless they resigned from the work and cash out everything. So that created a crisis. The two-part pension reforms enables workers to remain employed, which is the number one objective, especially in this economy, about a high unemployment rate. It allows workers to access limited relief to help pay off debts, to plug financial holes. That includes the immediate up to 30,000 months off relief. And also it includes, going forward from this year, access to a third of future savings. But the whole point of the reforms is that the pension funds are workers' monies. They must be there to support workers during their career and in the retirement. It's critical to give workers better choices besides resignation, cash out everything. It's helpful to enable workers to pay off some debt, and already about 40 billion rand has been released to more than 2 million workers to help pay off some of the short-term debt. But it gives the foundation also for further reforms, and we've already tabled reforms, further proposal for reforms to Treasury, to Parliament, to say, can we allow workers access to a greater part of the existing savings? Can we look at how to reduce the tax burden on workers? Can we also make sure that when workers lose their jobs, they're able to access all of the savings? But I think for the first time, we're beginning to make sure that pensions are geared to support workers, and workers have the final say about how the pensions are used to assist them. But equally, and it's not often you achieve a kind of a win-win consensus between government, labor, and business, and pension funds, for example. But also it helps to also boost savings as well, because right now, the reality is that most workers, because of the rigidity of the previous law, cash out on the pension funds about 5 or 6 times during their career. And that meant when workers reached retirement, they only had about 5 years or so of savings, which meant workers were retiring in absolute poverty. We're now actually able to boost savings by preserving 2/3 for retirement. Of course, with the caveat that if a worker loses their job, they should have access to everything. But that's also going to help, whilst giving relief, also help to boost savings simultaneously. So I think for us, it's quite an exciting thing. It is really geared towards South Africa's circumstances. And I think this is why you find there's been consensus on it between government, business and labor, the pension funds, but also even at Parliament too, where all the political parties support it in a very rare occasion of national consensus.
And you don't believe that much as it may have helped workers who are in difficulty, it may in the long run have the unintended consequences in that the very reason we wanted workers to save for retirement is precisely so that when that time comes, I know I may be resuscitating perhaps a debt debate here, but over the last while, in the last few months, has that not come back as a point of discussion?
No, it hasn't. So we had discussed that point, and you're right, Vuyo. We had discussed it before the law came into effect, that be careful of tinkering too much, be careful of unintended consequences. So that's why for future savings from 1 September onward this year, 2/3 goes to a preservation pot, which is preserved for when you retire, and a third goes to the savings pot. And the reality was, under the previous law, workers were cashing out everything every 5 years. When workers would change their jobs, they would cash out everything. When workers were drowning in debt, they would resign and cash out everything. So that's why the reality is that only about 6% of workers, or slightly larger than that, could really afford to retire. So that was a crisis on its own, which was sitting there bubbling, and all of us were kind of not sure how to deal with it. So the benefit of these reforms that, yes, we'll give you access to a third of your future savings if you want. You're not forced to do it. But in exchange, you also remain employed, which is critical. So you keep contributing to your pension fund. You remain earning a salary. But also we preserve 2/3 for retirement as well. So it's a simultaneously, we're giving relief, but also boosting savings. So I think for us, that's a positive thing. So it does address that concern. And the reality was that previously people were not saving. They were just cashing out every 5 years. And that was really a ticking time bomb.
Just lastly, perhaps, I mean, you had that Section 77 National Day of Action on the 7th of October, for which, I mean, you drew a lot of criticism there, that it wasn't the most organized of such actions, but it also showed that you had clearly not learnt from the experiences of the past around worker unity, acting in solidarity, and mobilizing, everyone you could possibly organize, and forgetting even on such days about issues such as, alliance matters, for example.
Yeah. Look, I mean, workers have the constitutional right to withhold the labor to go on strike. It's not an easy choice because normally the rule of no work, no pay applies. So in essence, workers are sacrificing a wage or a day's wage. That's not easy when workers are drowning in debt and are struggling to cope with the cost of living. But workers did it. There isn't a quorum or attendance register for a day of action. The point is to send a message to occupy the national discourse, to make sure society, government, business, employers hear the frustration of workers, hear what are workers' proposals, workers' grievances, workers' demands.
But nothing does. But nothing does that more than the biggest numbers you can possibly rally. That makes a statement.
No. But we're not naive to think that when workers are heavily indebted, that many are going to struggle to do so. So we do need to kind of be a bit more creative as Cosatu about how do we boost numbers, etc. At times we must look at lunchtime pickets and so forth, because some workers really, they live hand to mouth. They're not even coping on the existing salaries. So we always appreciate it. We don't take this decision lightly to take workers onto the streets because they will sacrifice a day's wages. But, some critics might say that, well, what do you achieve out of it? What's the point? And they will say, look, you haven't, the strike took place on a Monday. By Tuesday, nothing happened. But if we take a step back, because we do have a strike once a year, or when we take a step back, we can see many of our demands are step by step being achieved. We had raised previously the 2 pension reforms. That's come into effect. We had previously raised the national health insurance. The law has been passed by Parliament, signed by the President. It will take time to achieve, but the train is beginning to move. We had raised the issue of a debt relief package for ESCOM. That's being implemented. Or when government had stopped the SOD grant, we had intervened to get it reinstated and to make sure that we use it as a foundation for a basic income grant. So the reason why I say all of these things is that these are issues we have always highlighted, and one step by step we are beginning to achieve them. If we don't go and have these national days of action, then when will society listen to us? When will government listen to us? So we're not too worried about the numbers. Yes, we'd love bigger numbers, sure, but we do appreciate it's easier to mobilize numbers, in support of democracy, in protest against the party regime than it is in a democracy. We have to be a bit more creative about how we do better in organizing it, even including hybrid approaches to it, lunchtime pickets, etc. But I think for us, we would take a step back. We can point to many things we have managed to achieve at Parliament and NEDLAC in the political discourse. And those wouldn't have been achieved if we had simply just retreated to a boardroom trade union. Okay. And yes, you're right. It is a pity that not all unions joined us, not all federations did join us. They must speak for themselves why they don't feel the need to raise workers' grievances. But we're not going to wait for them to do so. Our mandate is to raise workers' grievances. But we have been hard on other workers from other federations that did join us on that day. And we encourage more to do so. But again, look, that's the difference between ourselves and other federations. We will take issue to the street and we'll raise it even when it's against the ANC, which is our ally, because there's a contested space and we're not a sweetheart union federation. We're one which is active and robust.
Matthew Parks, let me thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
More news in a moment.